Welcome back, Sebastian here. So today I want to talk about 7 things that have really surprised me so far in Formula One in 2023. So the first thing that's surprised me has been Yuki Tsunoda and how great he's been so far this year. So with Tsunoda, I feel like the first 3 races he's been extremely solid in all 3, and he's either gotten points, as was the case last weekend in the Australian Grand Prix, or he's been extremely close in 11th place. And that kind of consistency in a car that we think is pretty poor and possibly is the slowest car on the grid is really impressive. And it really shows kind of how much growth we've seen from Yuki over the first 2 and a bit years of his Formula One career. You have to remember that when he was teammates with Gasly, especially his first year, he looked miles off the pace. Last year he looked much closer, was either on the same pace as Gasly or was a little bit quicker than Gasly at many more races than he was in his rookie season. This year, obviously, with a brand new teammate, it's hard to tell. Obviously, another thing that could be going on is that Nyck de Vries, Yuki's teammate, could be having some struggles getting used to the AlphaTauri car. You have to remember that last year, even though he had lots of free practice sessions, they were all with the Mercedes-engined cars. So it's possible that maybe he's having some challenges getting used to the particularities of the Honda power unit and the AlphaTauri car as a whole. Another thing that I wanted to mention as well is that even though we all said that de Vries had such a great debut, I think unfortunately the bar being Nicholas Latifi, was quite low. So beating Nicholas Latifi made us think, oh wow, this guy can be a full-time F1 driver in his first ever race, except unfortunately that bar was Nicholas Latifi. So I think it maybe also kind of highlights how poor Latifi was last year as well. The second thing that I want to talk about is Mercedes' reliability struggles so far this year. Not necessarily the Mercedes team, but the Mercedes engine and the Mercedes power unit. So from the first 3 races, we've had 2 very clear engine-related DNFs, so Lance Stroll's retirement at the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix, as well as George Russell's explosive engine failure at the Australian Grand Prix. On top of that, we also have Norris's issues at the Bahrain Grand Prix, where he had to stop every 6-7 laps for basically putting air back in the car. And it's not entirely clear if that was engine-related or if that was a separate non-power unit-related problem. But nonetheless, 2 power unit DNFs from the first 3 races is not ideal. And this is particularly surprising from a power unit that for the vast majority of the turbo hybrid era has been the benchmark in terms of reliability. Remember, Lewis Hamilton, I think, has only had two mechanical DNFs since 2017, the last 6-7 years. So, of course, Abu Dhabi last year and then Austria 2018. So just from that one driver, you can see just how reliable the Mercedes power units have been. And so the rumor is that they've been turning the power units up a little bit more in order to try to get a bit more pace and be a bit closer to the pack leading Red Bulls. So it's definitely something that I did not expect before the season, but it'll be interesting to see how this story develops throughout the year. Number 3, Nico Hülkenberg's qualifying pace. So I think this is probably, of the 7 on the list, this is probably one of the most surprising. Nico's a bit of an older driver. He's, I think, 35 years of age. And generally around this age, especially, drivers start to lose their pace, especially in qualifying. Qualifying pace is usually the first thing that goes. But he's looked great. He's gotten the car into Q3, and he's been half a second or more ahead of Kevin Magnussen in qualifying at times. And I definitely did not expect that. I expected it to be much closer. I expected Hülkenberg to struggle in the qualifying and do a bit better in the races. But that being said, even in his substitute appearances, he did out-qualify the full-time driver, Lance Stroll, I think twice over their 2 stints, their 4 races together as teammates. So it does show that, even on very limited testing and very limited practice, he is capable of out-qualifying full-time F1 drivers, albeit Lance Stroll. So I think, but that being said, even with his age, it's probably been one of the things that surprised me the most this year in a really positive way. Number 4, is the closeness of qualifying from the back of the grid to the front of the grid. So we kind of expected the Red Bull to be miles in front in qualifying this year. However, the gap has actually been pretty small, definitely much smaller than the Mercedes of 2020, for example. Although that being said, it's possible that the reason that the gap's smaller than we thought it would be is because the Red Bull team are setting up their car almost exclusively for the race, because they may know they have so much extra pace in hand that they can sacrifice some top speed in qualifying in order for, say, tire wear, focusing on tire wear and race pace instead on Sunday. And even at the back of the grid, I think it's really great this year that we don't really have a clear back marker, a team that's guaranteed to lock out the back row of the grid like we did with Williams in 2019 or Haas in 2021. So having that kind of jeopardy all the way, that unpredictability all the way through qualifying, even though for now, for at least the opening races, it's a pretty good guarantee that a Red Bull is going to be on pole. Pretty much all the way from even to potentially second, depending on how Perez does, or reliability problems for the Red Bulls, all the way down to the back of the grid. We really don't know from race to race who's going to be where. I think that's great to see, and it definitely shows that the new regulations are working in terms of bringing the pack closer together. Of course, we'd love to have a title fight, but I think next year we have a really good opportunity for a title fight, and that's something I can definitely talk about in a future video. Number 5, Alfa Romeo struggles. So coming out of testing, I think a lot of teams kind of had Alfa Romeo as a dark horse. Some thought that they may be able to challenge the Alpines, for instance, maybe challenge the Aston Martins. Of course, neither of those things have happened. They've often struggled and looked like one of the 9th or 10th fastest team at points this year. And Valtteri Bottas in particular has not been particularly impressive. He's been out-qualified the last 2 races by Bottas, and as of right now, he's number 18th on my power rankings. Just to show that I think he's really had some struggles to start the year so far, outside of that opening race. And I think unfortunately Alfa Romeo, they started this set of regulations off last year really incredibly strongly. We're probably 3rd fastest, 4th fastest car, but that was only because they had the lightest car. And this year they kind of haven't really come flying out of the gate with a particularly fast car either. And I'm really not sure how much they're going to be able to develop the car, given how much they struggled to develop the car last year and how much they fell through the field. So it'll be interesting to see how they continue this year. It's definitely one of the more disappointing teams, I would say, this year, as well as the AlphaTauri. Number 6 is Williams speed. So Williams, I think we didn't really know what to expect coming out of winter testing. I think I had them last on the grid because we weren't really sure what to expect. I think coming out of testing, they looked okay. They didn't have there wasn't a whole lot of data to suggest they had moved up a whole lot, but they had a pretty good test. But I think I was very hesitant to put them higher than where I did, which was last in the constructors, unfortunately. But I think Albon's really shown that the car has quite a good bit of pace this year. They qualified 7th on the grid, best of the rest in Australia. And I think on tracks where we have really long straights and not a lot of high speed corners, kind of like Silverstone, for example, where it doesn't really rely on aerodynamic load as much, I think the Williams have a chance to be a very good car. So think Monza and Spa, for example. So I think that they've really had an excellent improvement, and based in looking at the video I did a couple weeks ago with the Bahrain, looking at how much teams had improved from the 2022 and Bahrain and Saudi Grand Prix to the 2023 Grand Prix, Williams was one of the teams that had improved the most, along with the Aston Martin, of course. And last thing that surprised me this year has been Red Bull's race pace. So we expected Red Bull to be the fastest car, but I really didn't expect them to have this much of an advantage on the rest of the field in terms of race pace. They seem to have built an incredibly efficient car. It's very fast on the straights, it's very good on its tires, and it's also extremely good in corners as well. And so much so that the team is clearly concerned about showing their hand too much, and they're worried that the FIA may try to put some rules in for next year to try to hurt them further. this was very similar to what Mercedes did in 2014 at the start of the turbo hybrid era, where they would basically decide coming into a weekend how much are we going to detune our engines to make us look more competitive, make us look closer to the grid than we actually are. So, and we've seen this on the radio with Max's engineer GP, Lambiase, basically telling Max to drive to a certain delta, and sometimes he basically can't even drive to it because, as we saw in Australia, because the tires got too cold. And I think, you know, a combination of a car that's exceptional in race pace, that is this year's Red Bull, with plus probably the best driver in terms of race pace, and Max Verstappen, I think it's going to be an extremely difficult combo to beat. And really, you're going to need mechanical problems, I think, is going to, or chaos, like we potentially had at last weekend's Grand Prix in Australia, are going to be really the only things that are going to potentially knock out Verstappen and cause him to not win a race this year. So those are the 7 things that I think have surprised me the most in F1 in 2023 so far. Please leave your thoughts below. What has surprised you the most so far this year, and what kind of things do you think are what kind of developing stories do you think are going to be the most intriguing to look at, and what are you looking forward to as we head to the European leg starting in Baku in, I guess, 2 and a bit weeks time. Thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.